Welcome. Welcome back as we continue with our book, The Last Week. And today we're on Thursday. And I would like to read from Mark 14, verses 12 to 16. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." So the disciples set out and went to the city and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. Well, we begin this week with where we left off last week with Judas. I ended with a rather sarcastic comment, recognizing Judas's traitorous actions. But we really don't know why he did it. There have been talk, and he had maybe for the money, that he was the treasurer of the group, might have been embezzling, but we don't have any real definitive answers. Because if you remember, Judas betrayed and then was promised money. So the money was not mentioned up front, so to speak. And we talked about how all the disciples misunderstood Jesus. And when Judas is actually mentioned in Mark's gospel, it's Judas, one of the 12. Although his behavior singles him out, Mark, by his name, does not single him out. But this is far more serious than just misunderstanding Jesus and misunderstanding Jesus' message. This involved an agreement with corrupt people who were so ruthless that they were willing to kill to preserve their own positions. Now, Jesus is aware of what's happening, and how do we know? Well, he tells us. He sends two disciples to make arrangements for the Passover meal. He tells them they'll see somebody carrying a water jug. Follow him. And then he tells them what to say. So he doesn't give a location. And this prevents Judas from telling the religious authorities where Jesus is and where the Passover meal will be. Because this Passover meal is important and really needs to take place. This Passover meal is different. Jesus frequently ate meals with people. In fact, he was often criticized by the religious leaders for his dining companions, I guess we could call them. And we have spoken before about the caste-like system which existed in Jesus' days. It's not exactly like India, but the level that you're born into is kind of the level that you stay at. And so that was in place. And Jesus ate with, and I'm quoting, tax collectors and sinners. But these were people considered undesirable by most other people. You just don't eat with those people. But Jesus did. And he accepted and enjoyed conversations with them. But this Passover meal is the Last Supper. And as such, some things are notably different. Jesus takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, and gives it. And the scene reminds us of another meal where Jesus fed 5,000. A great crowd had heard Jesus teaching all day. They hadn't eaten and they were hungry. The disciples want to send them away so that they can find something to eat in the villages surrounding it. The disciples really don't see feeding others as part of their responsibility. The disciples' response is, "I don't have enough, therefore I can't give." Sort of a scarcity kind of thought. But Jesus sees it differently. Jesus asks what they have. What do you have? 5 loaves, 2 fish. Jesus looks to heaven, blesses and breaks the bread. He gives the bread to the disciples for the crowd. The disciples have now become part of the solution. When Jesus is involved, the solution is different. Jesus says, if we share, there is enough. There is enough for everyone. Justice, mercy, kindness. There's enough for everyone to go around. I will now read from Mark 14, verse 22 to 25. While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will never drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." In the Last Supper, Jesus once again takes what is present, blesses, breaks, and gives it to all. All those present eat and drink. It's when the disciples, and I'm going to include us in this category here, participate with Jesus that there's a new Passover from slavery to freedom. And this is indeed the good news. But we need to return to the story because Jesus has much to go through before the day is over. The Passover meal has ended. After they sing a hymn, they all go to the Mount of Olives. Well, all except Judas, that is. Judas has arrangements to make because he has now identified where and when that he can perform his traitorous act. Jesus goes off to pray. He's quite distressed. He takes 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, with him, maybe for comfort. He is aware that none of the disciples understand his mission, however. We spoke of that last week. And their failure to understand will result in their abandoning Jesus. And he makes note of that. But right now, it's the 4 of them, Jesus and the 3 disciples who struggle to stay awake while Jesus bears his soul. Jesus is visibly upset as he prays. Mark's Jesus is very human. His prayer reveals his very close relationship with God. And he also asks to be relieved of his destiny. He doesn't want to go through suffering, rejection, being spit on, tortured, and then killed. Who would, really? Yet he totally trusts God. He trusts God in spite of his circumstances. It's God's will, not his. And we make note of that. I will now read Mark 14, verses 43 to 45. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, scribes, and elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came up, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The time has come. Judas makes his move. He identifies Jesus. You may wonder why this was necessary. After all, the crowd with Judas was from the chief priests, scribes, and elders. Frankly, I had assumed it was the chief priests, scribes, and elders for a long time. They knew Jesus. I missed the word "from." It's very important. So the crowd actually are temple soldiers, hired by the chief priests, scribes, and elders, and sent. And they no doubt did not know Jesus. And so that was why it was necessary for Judas to be the identifier, the betrayer. Jesus has now been taken into custody, I guess we could say, and taken before all the chief priests, elders, and scribes. The high priest is in charge. At this point, all of the disciples have left, and we're not sure exactly how this hearing or trial is conducted. Somebody might have been interviewed later. Maybe somebody from the high priest or that particular group came out and talked about it and all. But what's important is that we have an accounting of the event. And we have to remember who the temple authorities were. They're part of the domination system: economic exploitation, political oppression, and religious language to justify it. So their temple authorities, the few, ruled the many, the majority of the Jews. And so that is the political the political oppression. They exploited those Jews who were poor and powerless. They really did not represent the Jewish people. They collaborated with Rome, rigging the economy in their favor, those people's favor. So in a way, it would be unfair to blame the Jews collectively for Jesus' death. We have for a long time, though, and they've gotten kind of a bad rap because we saw them as a single group when in effect there were some within the group who were exploiting the others. I will now read from Mark 14:66 to 72. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, You were also with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I don't know or understand what you're talking about." And he went out in the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. Then after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I don't know this man you're talking about." And at that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. In this section of Mark, there's another framing, remember, where 2 events are taken together and connect and reinforce each other and are more powerful together than they are separately. In this one, again, we can call it event A, I guess. Peter follows Jesus, so he's behind Jesus, into the high priest's courtyard, sort of lurking around the fire, so to speak. And we have to pause there. And then we have event B. Event B begins with the religious leaders at the hearing or trial seeking evidence to justify Jesus' death. Well, this really isn't going very well until the high priest directly confronts Jesus. "Who are you? Who are you? Are you the Christ?" And Jesus answers, "I am." So the direct confrontation does produce a blasphemy, so they have their desired result at this moment. Event A continues. Now Peter was lurking around the fire, and he is being confronted. So confrontation is the framing by a servant girl of the high priest. How could she be sure that Peter was with Jesus? Interesting. Did he dress differently? She said, "You're a Galilean." How did she know that? Well, for that, we really need to go to the book, The Jesus I Never Knew by Philip Yancey. His accent. Peter, Jesus, Galilee, different accent from the rest of the country. Actually, Galilee was not very well respected by the rest of the country. It was considered very backward culturally, not exactly sophisticated spiritually. The Galileans pronounced Hebrew so poorly that they weren't even asked to read the Torah in other synagogues. And the common language of Aramaic was also not spoken terribly well. There isn't anything exactly today that would be the same, except you got New York and you got the South, different accents, and you can tell immediately when you talk to them. That's how she knew. So the framing starts with Peter warming himself in the shadows of the high priest's house. When confronted, again, confrontation is the frame. As event A continues, he's again warming himself, and with the second confrontation, the first confrontation, he was just warming himself to begin with. He wasn't really confronted. He denies Jesus to the servants. In event B, Jesus' confrontation produces a brave response to a powerful official. So who are we? Which group do we identify with? The status quo, those in power, the establishment, or those seeking to change the system, as Jesus was trying to do? Christians have been confronted for centuries. Some confrontations were for faith. When Mark wrote his gospel, there was persecution in the Jewish homeland. In other times, more modern times, Christians have also had to choose. I'm thinking about Columbine. But Christians have had other confrontations too, and those are things that happen constantly in today's times. Values, human rights, prejudices, etc. Those confrontations occur every day, and we have to make choices. And although we would hope to be like Jesus if confronted, we actually may be a little more like Peter. Peter gives us hope. Even if we mess up bad, there's a chance. Denying Jesus or God is not the worst. The worst is despair. The worst is thinking God does not love us enough to forgive us if we ask. Peter and Judas, one wept with sorrow, the other did not. One went on to lead a commendable life, the other died early. Let us close with prayer. Lord, I have not accepted opportunities to serve you, and I am sorry. I have allowed my human fears to stop me from helping others. Forgive me. Strengthen me so that I may carry out your will. Amen.